Objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I ask to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks, Madam President. Madam President, today in the Wall Street Journal, there coincidentally was an editorial on the subject about which I speak. And this was entitled, "Republicans Blow with the Wind. Another Industry Wants to Keep Its Tax Subsidies." It's about the possibility that the Senate will be asked, maybe as early as the next few days during the debate on the transportation bill, to extend yet one more year the federal taxpayer subsidy for large wind turbines. I would like to take a few minutes to say why I don't believe we should do that. And I'd like to ask consent that following my remarks that the Wall Street Journal editorial be included.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I believe it's time for Congress to stop the big wind gravy train. Subsidies for developers of huge wind turbines will cost taxpayers $14 billion over 5 years between 2009 and 2013. $14 billion. This is according to the Joint Tax Committee and the Treasury Department. This is more than the special tax breaks for big oil, which Congress should also end. $6 billion of the big wind subsidies will come from the production tax credit for renewable energy, which Congress temporarily enacted in 1992. The prospect for the expiration at the end of this year of this tax break has filled the capital with lobbyists hired by investors wealthy enough to profit from the tax breaks. President Obama even wants to make these tax breaks permanent. According to Wall Street Journal, this is a, quote, make or break moment for wind power companies. There are three reasons why the big wind subsidies should go the way of the $5 billion annual ethanol subsidy, which Congress allowed to expire last year. First, we can't afford it. The federal government borrows 40 cents of every dollar it spends. It just cannot justify such a subsidy, especially for what the Nobel Prize-winning United States Energy Secretary calls a, quote, mature technology, unquote. Second, wind turbines produce a relatively puny amount of expensive, unreliable electricity. Wind produces 2.3% of our electricity. Despite all these government subsidies, less than 8% of our pollution-free electricity. One alternative, of course, is natural gas, abundant, cheap, and very clean as a way of producing electricity. Another alternative is nuclear. Reactors power our Navy and produce 70% of our pollution-free electricity. Madam President, using windmills to power a country that uses 1/4 of all the electricity in the world would be the energy equivalent of going to war in sailboats. Finally, these massive turbines too often destroy the environment in the name of saving the environment. When wind advocate T. Boone Pickens was asked whether he would put turbines on his Texas ranch, Mr. Pickens answered, "No, they're too ugly." A new documentary movie, Windfall, chronicles upstate New York residents debating whether to build giant turbines in their town. A New York Times review of this new documentary film reported the following, quote, "Turbines are huge. Some are 40 stories tall, with 130-foot blades weighing 7 tons and spinning at 150 miles an hour. They can fall over or send parts flying. Struck by lightning, say they can catch fire. Their 24/7 rotation emits nerve-wracking low frequencies, like a pulsing disco, amplified by rain and moisture, and can generate a disorienting strobe effect in sunlight. Giant flickering shadows can tarnish a sunset's glow on a landscape." This is the New York Times reporting in its film review of the documentary movie Windfall. So let's consider the three arguments one by one. First, the money. For all we hear about big oil, you may be surprised to learn that special tax breaks for big wind are greater. During the 5 years from 2009 to 13, as I said, federal subsidies for big wind equal $14 billion. Here I'm only counting the production tax credit and the cash grants that the 2009 stimulus law offered to wind developers in lieu of the tax credit. An analysis of that stimulus cash grant program by Greenwire found that 64% of the 50 highest dollar grants awarded, or about $2.7 billion, went to projects that had begun construction before the stimulus measures started. Steve Ellis, the vice president of Taxpayers for Common Sense, told Greenwire, quote, "It's essentially funding economic activity that would have occurred anyway. It's just a pure subsidy," unquote. According to President Obama's new budget, big oil receives multiple tax subsidies. Doing away with them would save about $4.7 billion a year in fiscal year 2013, or about $22 billion over 5 years, according to the president's budget. So far, it sounds like big oil, with $22 billion in subsidies, is bigger in its subsidies than big wind with $14 billion. But here's the catch. Many of the subsidies that the president is attacking oil companies for receiving are regular tax provisions that are the same or similar to those other industries receive. For example, Xerox, Microsoft, Caterpillar all benefit from tax provisions like the manufacturing tax credit, amortization, or depreciation of used equipment that the president is counting as big oil subsidies. And of course, wind energy companies also benefit from many similar tax provisions. But the production tax credit that benefits wind is in addition to the regular tax code provisions that benefit many companies. So the only way to make a fair comparison is to look only at subsidies that mostly benefit only oil or only wind, and by that measure, wind gets more breaks than oil. The Heritage Foundation has done an analysis. It shows that if big oil received the same type of production tax credit as big wind, then the taxpayer would be paying big oil about $50 per barrel of oil when adjusted for today's prices. And according to a 2008 Energy Information Administration report, big wind received an $18 federal subsidy per megawatt hour, $18 federal subsidy per megawatt hour, 25 times as much per megawatt hour as subsidies for all other forms of electricity combined. Madam President, the production tax credit became law in 1992. It was supposed to be temporary. Its goal was to jumpstart renewable energy production. While it is advertised as a tax credit for renewable energy, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, 75% of the credit goes to wind developers. Now here's how it works. For every kilowatt hour of electricity produced from wind, turbine owners receive 2.2 cents in a tax credit from the federal taxpayers. For example, if a Texas utility buys electricity from a wind developer at, say, 6 cents a kilowatt hour, the federal taxpayer, you and me, will pay the developer another 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour. This 2.2 cent subsidy continues for the first 10 years that the turbine is in service. And this 2.2 cent credit is worth 3.4 cents per kilowatt hour in cash savings on the tax return of a wealthy investor. Wind developers often sell their tax credits to Wall Street banks or big corporations or other investors who have large incomes. They create what is called a tax equity deal in order to lower or even eliminate taxes. This is the scheme that our president, who is championing economic fairness, would like to make permanent. Energy expert Daniel Yergin, the Pulitzer Prize winner, says that the price of oil last year during 2011, when adjusted for inflation, is higher than at any time since 1860. It therefore makes no sense whatsoever to give special tax breaks to big oil. Neither does it make sense, Madam President, to extend special tax breaks to big wind, a mature technology. For every $3 saved by eliminating these wasteful subsidies, I would spend $2 to reduce the federal debt and $1 to double research for new forms of cheap, clean energy for our country. Now, the second problem with electricity produced from wind is there's not much of it. And since the wind blows when it wants to, and for the most part it can't be stored, it's not reliable. For this reason, the claims in newspapers about how much electricity wind produces are misleading because of the difference between the capacity of an energy plant and its actual production. Daniel Yergin says that the U.S. installed capacity for wind power grew at an average rate of 40% between 2005 and 2009. In terms of absolute capacity, Yergin writes in his book, that growth in capacity was the equivalent to adding 25 new nuclear plants. That's pretty impressive. We only have 104 civilian nuclear plants. But, Yergin writes, in terms of actual generation of electricity, it was more like adding 9 reactors. This is because nuclear plants operate 90% of the time, while wind turbines operate about 1/3 of the time. Here's an example from the area where I live. The Tennessee Valley Authority constructed a 29 megawatt wind farm on Buffalo Mountain at a cost of $60 million to its ratepayers, those of us who pay the electric bills. It's the only wind farm in the Southeast because the wind doesn't blow very hard in the southeastern United States. Now, you read in the papers about a 29 megawatt wind farm, and you'll think that's pretty good, but that's not its real output. In practice, Buffalo Mountain has only generated electricity 19% of the time, since the wind doesn't blow very much down there. So this wind farm, sounding like a 29 megawatt power plant, only generates 6 megawatts. TVA considers Buffalo Mountain to be a failed experiment. In fact, looking for wind power in the Southeast is a little like looking for hydropower in the desert. So one problem with this big wind set of subsidies is that it has encouraged developers to build wind projects in places where the wind doesn't blow, or the wind doesn't blow very much. Finally, there's the question of whether, in the name of saving the environment, wind turbines are destroying the environment. These are not your grandma's windmills. They are taller than the Statue of Liberty. Their blades are as long as a football field. Their blinking lights can be seen for 20 miles. Not everyone agrees with T. Boone Pickens that they are ugly, but when these towers move from television advertisements to your neighborhood, you might agree with Mr. Pickens. Energy sprawl is the term conservation groups use to describe the march of 45-story wind turbines onto the landscape of America the Beautiful. If the United States generated 20% of our electricity from wind, as some have suggested, that would cover an area the size of West Virginia with 186,000 wind turbines. It would also be necessary to build 12,000 new miles of transmission lines. And where do transmission lines go? Through conservation easements, through backyards, through scenic areas. The late Ted Kennedy and his successor, Senator Scott Brown, have both complained about how a wind farm the size of Manhattan Island will clutter the landscape around Nantucket Island. Robert Bryce told the Wall Street Journal that the noise of turbines, this, in his words, infrasound issue, is the most problematic for the wind industry. Mr. Bryce said, they want to dismiss it out of hand, but the low-frequency noise is very disturbing. He explained, I interview people all over, and they all complained with identical words and descriptions about the problems they were feeling from the noise. Madam President, Theodore Roosevelt was our greatest conservation president, and his greatest passion was for birds. Birds must think that wind turbines are Cuisinarts in the sky. Last month, 2 golden eagles found dead at California's Pine Tree Wind Farm, bringing the total count of dead golden eagles at that wind farm to 8 carcasses. And the Los Angeles Times reports that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has determined that the 6 golden eagles found dead earlier at the 2-year-old wind farm in Kern County were struck by blades from some of the 90 turbines spread across 8,000 acres at the site. This puts the death rate, the Times said, per turbine at the Pine Tree Wind Farm at 3 times higher than at California's Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area, which has 5,000 turbines that kill 67 golden eagles each year. Now, apparently, eagle killing has become so commonplace that the United States Department of Interior, and I'm not making this up, has a process in place to grant wind developers hunting licenses for eagles. In Goodhue County, Minnesota, a company wants to build 48 turbines on 50 square miles of land, and to do that, Madam President, it has applied for an eagle take permit, which will allow it to kill a certain number of eagles before facing penalties. Now, I've studied this, but I have not been able to figure out how such a hunting license for eagles squares with federal laws that have existed for nearly a century that will put you in prison or fine you if you kill migratory birds or eagles. Nor have I figured out how it squares with the Fish and Wildlife Service finding Exxon $600,000 in 2009 when oil development harmed protected birds. Do not the same laws protecting birds apply both to big wind and to big oil? Surely, Madam President, there are appropriate places for wind power in a country that needs clean electricity and that has learned the values of a diverse set of energy sources. But if reliable, cheap, and clean electricity without energy sprawl is our goal, then 4 nuclear reactors, each occupying 1 square mile, would equal the production of a row of 50-story wind turbines strung along the entire 2,178-mile length of the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. And according to Benjamin Zeiker at the American Enterprise Institute, a 1,000-megawatt natural gas power plant would take up about 15 acres, while a comparable wind farm would take up 48,000 to 60,000 acres. And of course, even if you built all those turbines and strung them from Maine to Georgia, you'd still need the nuclear or gas plants for when the wind doesn't blow. So, Madam President, this is what our energy policy ought to be. First, double the $5 billion federal energy budget for research on new forms of cheap, clean, reliable energy. In 2008, I made an address at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and suggested a new Manhattan Project for clean energy independence. I'm talking about such research as for the 500-mile battery for electric cars, for commercial uses of carbon captured from coal plants, solar power installed at less than $1 a watt, or even offshore wind turbines. Second, we should strictly limit and support a handful of jumpstart research and development projects to take new technologies from the research and development phase to the commercial phase. I'm thinking here of projects like ARPA-E, as we call it, which is modeled after the Defense Department's little agency, DARPA, that led through its work to the internet, to the stealth, and other remarkable technologies. Or the 5-year program for small modular nuclear reactors that Congress approved just this year. Third, we should end wasteful, long-term special tax breaks, such as those for big oil and those for big wind. The savings from ending those subsidies should be used to double clean energy research and to reduce our federal debt. Madam President, for a strong America, we need large amounts of cheap, reliable, clean energy, and we need a balanced budget. This is an energy policy that can help us do both. Madam President, I thank you, and I yield the floor. I notice the absence of a quorum.